Thanks a lot. I'll be brief. Happy to be here to introduce speaker on the one of the most extraordinary projects of our time, or of any time really, and a project that's all about time, which had its birth in a seemingly offhand remark by a musician and a design school professor who wondered, why isn't our sense of now longer than it is? Just why do we talk about right now? What do we mean by right now? Why don't we make that yesterday and tomorrow, or maybe 1,000 years in the past, or 1,000 years in the future? Why isn't now longer? Why aren't we free to see our own now in a much broader context of time? Well, you could say that it's none of our business, and we can't really do anything about it. I mean, the time before we were born and the time after we cease to be, why should we be engaged about that? But you know, we're similarly limited in space, because we're just mortals, and we wouldn't say that our backyard was all there was. We do live on a planet. It's a rocky sphere. The Earth is whole. It's a whole entity. It's not just a patchwork of tiny personal spaces. It's one thing. And why isn't time seen in that kind of wholeness and space? So there was a project that came from this cultural insight, and it involved many things: a library, clock, an artifact, a physical, cultural intervention, which was intended to establish this long now sensibility and to sort of carry this idea forward in time, just to prove that it's possible not just to be cosmopolitan, but also to be cosmotemporal, and to demonstrate some human solidarity across the stream of time, sort of let a paper boat loose down the river of time. And this venture started in the mid-1990s, and I was, of course, extremely interested in it. But the thing that most impressed me about it was how calm and deliberate the people were who were engaged in this project. Given that they wanted to build a clock that would last 10,000 years, they really did seem to be pacing themselves. And artifacts would come from this little movement. There were certain metal discs with inscriptions, and there was some music, which I often use in composing my own work. There was a series of lectures about this that are still going on, the SALT talks. You can find these online, the long bets, the long server, all emanations from this group, really a loose group of activists, inventors, designers, engineers, entrepreneurs, culturati. You know, that's the Long Now group. They don't boast. They don't quarrel with each other, at least not in public. They're quite modest about their colossal effort, really, even self-effacing. They're not faddish about it. They don't brag that they see farther into the past or the future than other people. They don't swagger. They don't go to door making converts. There's no cult compound for them. But the Long Now really is about deeds. It's about deeds that last, as well as words about lasting. And of all the places in the world that might host the clock of the Long Now, this extraordinary invention, this intervention, it's your part of the world. It's in your landscape. And I'm as eager to hear about the details of this as you are. So I'm here to introduce the executive director of the Long Now Foundation, Alexander Rose. He's a designer, he's an inventor, he's a builder, he's a guy with a number of patents that he's won. He's not a mere onlooker like myself, a commentator, but a guy who's pretty much right down there with the pickaxes, the chainsaws, and the rock dust. Here is Alexander Rose.
Great. Thank you very much, Bruce. And thanks for having me here. I'm in general, just encouraged that such a center is finally being formed. And my only disappointment is that I actually have to run off to go perform a wedding further out into the desert this afternoon. So I'm not going to be able to stay here and meet a lot of you. Please, after this, I will be here for the break. Come and get a card from me. There's pretty much everybody I heard about that's here I want to meet. As Bruce said, this effort by the Long Now Foundation really started as a loose group, really a conversation among a set of people who kept bringing up this idea of long-term thinking and areas where clearly it wasn't being addressed. And one of the stories, which I'm sure many of you have heard, but it was the story that got several of what became the founding board kind of coalesced around this, as well as myself interested in it, was this the story of the beams at New College, Oxford. And there's at least versions of this story that are true, but I'll tell you one version of it. We'll see. When the hall was built at New College, and then the New College was in the 1200s, it was built with these giant oak beams over the main hall. And 500 years later, when these beams had become rotten and beetly, they were looking for a way to replace them, and they couldn't. Most of those trees were gone out of Europe at that point. And this is in the 1800s. And it wasn't until they spoke to the school forester who said, oh, well, we have the trees that you planted. And it turned out that when they built that hall, they also planted a grove of oak. So at the very least, this was a normal practice at the time of keeping forests to maintain buildings and ships as well. And it was clear to some of the people that were starting the Long Now Foundation, people like Danny Hillis, a computer scientist, and Stuart Brand, who had started the Whole Earth Catalog, Brian Eno, the artist that, that Bruce was just mentioning, that this type of thinking was not going on anymore. And even the idea that you might replant those acorns for the next 500 years was unsure. And so this group of people started talking about this idea of the long now. And one of the first things they tried to figure out is, what is the time scale of the long now? And it's not a astronomical billions of year time scale that's kind of dwarfing of the human experience. It's very difficult to think that you have any real effect on that time scale. It's not even this geologic millions of year time scale. What we're after is exactly what Bill mentioned of the Anthropocene. The idea that now is not just right now. It's not the 5 minutes that we're in, but it's the human experience moment, which roughly started when the last ice age retreated and what we now know as civilization started. And so we felt if you can look back this far in the Anthropocene, you should be able to look forward this far as well. And this becomes our human moment or our human now. Now, what I'm going to talk about during this talk is a little bit about our process, or at least half of this talk will be about our process into getting to where we are, and then about how we're designing and working towards a large earthwork intervention, really, as well as a machine. I'm not going to talk about a lot of the other projects, but they are available on our website. And then I'm going to talk about what we're actually building right now. And as I've been working on this project since 1997, so 14 or 15 years now, I've been collecting these stories as well as traveling to places that represent multi-millennial efforts, either accidental or purposeful. One of the great examples that I've come across is the Antikythera device. This is an astronomic clock that was found off the coast of Antikythera, Greece. It wasn't until recently when they started doing some X-ray work that they found out how extensive of a device it was, and in fact it predated the known discovery of things like differential gearing. But it's now actually been totally recreated by several hobbyist groups, and we now have a working, several working versions of this device. And this is kind of great for me as a clock designer who's building an artifact that's basically, I'm building it for future archaeologists to find it. And even if it was lost, sunk to the bottom of the ocean, that maybe it might be recreated, and if I do my job right. Other things that have kind of been lost and found, this is a great technique for anything that wants to last for a really long time, is to be lost. Now, of course, you have to be found to be relevant again, but the Dead Sea Scrolls are another great example, as well as some of the great cave painting. All of these also had an element of being kind of chemically lucky, meaning that the chemistry that they were embedded in helped them survive. And there's a few cases in the world where people have purposefully set out to generate this type of chemistry. And actually, Ed Bertinsky's here. He gave a talk in our series a while ago about purposefully creating this chemistry for photographs that could last for 10,000 years. And he actually took our 10,000-year gauntlet further than just about any one of our speakers has. I highly recommend that talk. But one of the more interesting ones of antiquity is this one. This is a set of lacquer trays and plates that were buried in a burial mound in Mongolia. And these are over 2,000 years old, but it looks like they just came out of the ground today. And the way they did that was they actually lined the burial chamber with cedar, then a layer of clay, then 6 feet of activated charcoal all the way around, then clay, then cedar, then earth. And that activated charcoal, so everything sealed out the water, that was the first step. The next step was the activated charcoal, which actually actively got the oxygen out of the air. And that preserved it, and even the person who was buried here, they were able to get her stomach contents and find out all kinds of interesting things about their diet. So it is possible to create a chemically lucky environment, or you can just be lucky, like this Armenian shoe that was found. It's 5,000 years old, but it's a reminder that in order to build something to last for even 5 to 10,000 years, it doesn't have to be made out of the most amazing materials necessarily. It just has to be in the right environment. Now, another interesting tactic that I've seen used is this idea of sacrifice, and we see it in natural systems. Obviously, a lizard losing its tail is a way to distract a predator and keep the whole species or the whole animal alive. But it's also happened on much larger timescales with much larger land art, if you will. So the pyramids were looted actually pretty quickly after they were completed. The valuable stuff in the down under was looted within a few centuries, and even the outer casing stones, as many of you know, were taken about 1,000 years later, or several thousand years later, to build mosques in Cairo. But their basic nature of pyramidness we still have. So we could consider that at least the architectural element of this to be a success. They have lasted for 4,500 years. And a more recent example, the Taj Mahal was all encrusted with jewels all the way throughout. And it was one of the last times it was looted by the British, I guess. They spent a long time prying those gems and jewels out of the hallways, and it probably saved the building from a lot of destruction. By the time they had finished that, they kind of were over the destruction. They felt they had extracted the value out of that building. And so this is an idea where you kind of have this ablative armor that can help the real artifact survive if you give up some trinkets at some point. Another method of making things last for a very long time is to make them extremely remote. I had a great opportunity earlier this year to actually travel with Steve Rowell of the Center of Land Use Interpretation to the Seed Vault in Svalbard. This was a place in the northern Arctic where the government of Norway has built a 1,000-year seed vault underground in the permafrost, and this is what the airport looks like as you're landing there. I mean, truly, truly remote place, and an incredible place that you can actually buy a commercial plane ticket to. I highly recommend going. It's pretty amazing. But they're building underground as we start finding a lot of these facilities. As I said, in the permafrost to preserve the seeds naturally at a very low temperature, and they chill them down even further, down to negative 18°C. And these are the seeds themselves. All those cardboard boxes are the USDA, who refuse to use the standard plastic boxes for some reason. The most incredible thing about this trip, though, aside from just going there, was this little logbook. And what was amazing about it to me was that I was signing my name right after Ban Ki-moon, Jimmy Carter, delegations from all over the world. And the idea that a place this remote and for a purpose this esoteric and weird had captured the imagination. In fact, because it was so remote, almost made it more enticing for groups like this to come. And they had really failed to design this place around visitorship, and it was very difficult to move through, and they don't like to open the doors because it hurts the seeds and things like that. But it was a good reminder that, you know, no matter how remote and ridiculous it is, in fact, the more remote and ridiculous it is, the more likely visitors are to come. Another way to get things to last a very long time is to actually just take a very long time to build them. And this gets you through a kind of critical time in an artifact's life, which is right after it's done and it's new and shiny, and before it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And you know, this cathedral at Cologne took over 600 years to build, and it's got scaffolding on it up there right now. It's going to continuously be under repair, and we've seen other cathedrals that are on this path, and in fact, this one, the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, is not done and is already a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And so it's achieving that goal, and it's about 100 years into its build process. We're also seeing this obviously with Heiser's City and Terrell's Crater. These things are kind of going to be on that level by the time they're done, and they've managed to escape that unfashionable time, that time when the pyramids were looted and the time when the gems were pried out of the Taj Mahal already, in a sense. The other way, of course, is to build a cultural institution around the thing to maintain it. This is a picture of a beam I took in Ely, England. This is 8 stories up in a cathedral, and that's a 700-year-old wooden beam. Again, not a material that you would associate with lasting a very long time, or an environment that's very conducive to making wood last. You know, Ely, England's damp and rainy, but they've maintained the roof for 700 years, and therefore this has stayed up. And we, in fact, see places in the world where, you know, this is the known as the oldest continuously standing wooden structure in the world. It's 12 or 13 stories tall in Japan. You can't even, building codes in North America won't let you build a wooden building this tall. It's in an earthquake zone, but it's over 1,600 years old and made of wood, but has been meticulously maintained by a civilization that keeps it going. And the Japanese also have another method, which is shown here in the temples at Ise. These have been rebuilt every 20 years in an exact replica. And this is a strange photo. This one was taken almost 20 years ago when they were both up. And so there's the new temple at the bottom and the old temple at the top, where you can start to see it's being disassembled. But being built out of very ephemeral materials, thatch roof, wood, rice paper walls, but rebuilt every 20 years. And it's actually this master to apprentice kind of rebuilding that's probably helped it survive, and possibly even helped be a kind of touchstone for Shinto religion through the oncoming Buddhism and things like that coming to Japan. So the institutional memory is another technique. The other thing that we've found in looking at multi-millennial sites throughout the world is that they all try and keep the water out, and they all fail. Water is really the big enemy of preservation, and this picture I took right before they took my camera away. I was visiting the Mormon Genealogical Archives outside Salt Lake City, but they were very gracious to give me a tour, but I wasn't allowed to take pictures inside. But this, it's a 1,000-year facility designed to protect the genealogical archives of the Mormon Church, and there are a few photos online that I found of the construction. This is it when it was being drilled and blasted, and these are the microfiche drawers. And when I was there, the interesting thing is that they had the facility's already flooded. It was built in the 60s, kind of a Cold War reaction, but it's already flooded 3 or 4 times. They don't keep microfiche in any of the bottom drawers. They've now cut in the concrete drainage ditches that drain this whole space out underneath the nuclear-proof bank vault doors. So water turns out to be more of a danger than nuclear war. And we see this throughout, and this is not from that facility, this is a different one. This is a pump that was put in last year at the seed vault that was built in 2008 as a 1,000-year facility. And what they kind of kept the water out, but what they didn't realize is that hoarfrost was going to freeze on the inner concrete walls and just condense out of the air. And then if there was warm enough temperatures in the summer to come up above freezing, that would run down to the floor, go down the slope, making this an icy slope that you had to walk down into the facility, and then start filling up the seed bank with water. So always making it drain and diverting the water, don't think you can keep it out, became a real principle. And underground seems to be a really good tactic. Also earlier this year, I got a tour of the Oncalo nuclear waste facility, and as you know, here in Nevada, there's a politically mandated 10,000-year facility. Not to be outdone, the Scandinavians their political mandate is 100,000 years. And they are well underway with their facility. It's pretty much all the yellow part of this diagram is already built. And they've taken some very different tactics. But I think what's most interesting about both of these efforts, both the Yucca Mountain here in the United States, which we have visited as well as Oncalo, is that that long-term amount of time that they were politically given, the engineers are doing their best with it. But the reality is that no one can guarantee anything on this time scale. And it was our first realization that by trying to guarantee and actually meticulously plan for 10,000 years, you can only fail. So what you really need to do, and the much smarter thing to do with nuclear waste even, would be to say, we're going to build what we hope to be a long-term facility that we're going to revisit its technology every 100 years and make an iterative process. This would be the only way to keep something contextual on this time scale. The last one I'll talk about is be careful of your ideologies. And Bruce mentioned that we've been careful already on this, but this is always an image that sticks in my head. These are the Buddhas of Bamiyan in Afghanistan, and the image on your left is before the Taliban blew it up, and the image on the right is modern day. And I don't think it's pretty hard to find an ideological symbol such as the Buddha that could be more benign, but it was still taken as an enemy of that state. So be careful of those types of ideologies. So basically, in conclusion, we want to build it so that you can lose it and find it. But it wants to be out of the mainstream, so it can be lost. Everything is burning, so look for things that have neutral chemistry. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with that. Sacrifice. Should we put trinkets in there to be stolen on purpose? I'm not sure yet. Definitely make it remote. Cities just churn too fast. They're the targets of wars. They have fashions that come in and out. Should we build really slow? Right now we're building pretty fast. Just because the costs of building on a remote site are so high. But obviously, people like Heiser and Terrell are working on a much longer time scale, and it's also working for them. But maybe I should talk to the Dia and Lannon folks to see how well that's working for you. That we need to make an institution that can survive alongside of this. We're trying to figure out. Right now we're about a 15, 16-year-old institution. Obviously, we can only do this as a 1 year at a time kind of effort. The diversion one, yes, we have definitely taken this lesson to heart, the idea that we cannot stop the water, we're going to have to just route it. We're working underground, and we can try and avoid ideologies, but you never know what will be ascribed to you moving forward. So with that, I'm going to show you a little bit about what we're actually building now and what we have built. When I started working with Danny Hillis in 1997, one of the first things that we set out to do was to build just one complete prototype. And we started looking at all the timepieces that had ever been created, and we started measuring them against these 5 principles: longevity, maintainability, transparency, evolvability, and scalability. And these all seem pretty self-explanatory, but basically the idea that we should make it out of materials that last. We are allowing for a certain amount of maintenance, but that maintenance should not require very high-tech means, that it should be transparent. You can look at it and understand it. This is why this is not a big electronic clock. It's very difficult to reverse engineer silicon chips and things like that. If the display is dead when you get there, you don't even know what it was trying to show. That it should evolve. Things like calendar systems clearly aren't going to last for 10,000 years. So we should make it so that people can update it. And that it should be scalable so that we can build small prototypes and scale those up. But just to give you an idea of one of the types of problems that we solve on this project. 5 minutes, wow. The equation of time is a funny thing that's represented by this picture, by taking a picture of the sun about once a week throughout the year. This is the analemma, and the clock that we're building synchronizes itself to the sun on any sunny day. And the problem with that is it also has a pendulum that's keeping much more regular time than that. And this plus or minus 15 minutes difference has to be accounted for, as well as the Earth's precessional cycle every 26,000 years, as well as the Earth's rotational rate slowing down by about a second a century. And all of that had to be captured in this one 3-dimensional cam to rectify solar time to absolute time. Things like adding an extra digit to the Gregorian year is also required. This is the 5-digit dates that we use on everything now. And this was the first prototype that we finished in 1999. That one's at the Science Museum in London. It's about 8 feet tall. So now I'm going to show you what we're building at full scale. I'm going to answer a couple of the questions that I know I always get, which is what will it cost, when will it be done, and what will it all really look like? And since this is being built underground, we don't really want to show the kind of weird cutaway view that no one will ever see. We really want it to be experienced. So we're not going to kind of show those kind of pictures, at least so far. But I will show you some of the way it works. And a couple of the parts that are being built of it right now are the power system and the chime generator. The chime generator is one of the more complex machines within the clock that can sequence a series of 10 bells in a different sequence each day for 10,000 years. So over 3.5 million bell sequences. These are this is as I said, the most complex part of the clock. And the first models we built of it and working prototypes were this big, and these were about 8 inches across, these little metal wheels you see in the center. And now we're working at 8 feet across in 316 marine grade stainless steel and ceramic bearings. The other part of the clock that is under construction right now is the power system. And one of the parts that literally just got completed within a few months ago was one of the largest gears in the clock, this 316 stainless gear. Also 3-dimensionally carved teeth that only have rolling friction. And one of the most critical elements of the clock is all ceramic unlubricated bearings. So there's no lubrication and there's no metal-to-metal contact in any of the rolling points. And, we just completed a raise bore phase, which actually this is one of the drills that was used in the rescue in Chile. They drill down a pilot hole, and then we bring in a 12-foot diameter bit and pull that up through the earth to do a 500-foot vertical, 12.5-foot diameter raise, and that's going to give us the kind of first vertical access through the space. I was just out there shooting a survey of that, and it's all looking very good. None of it collapsed. It's all good rock. That was all very good news for us. The last thing I'm going to talk about here is basically the fact that we have to invent our own tools for this process. And many great land artists and many great artists have had to invent their own tools. And we're trying to create three-dimensionally carved underground spaces in rock without a lot of blasting for the areas around the clock that we need to keep very secure so they're not overbroken and fall in. So things like the spiral staircase and conical shape that's going to be sculpted out of that raise. So by combining some of the technology from the mining and as well as quarrying industry and working with this amazing group up in Seattle called Seattle Solstice, we've taken a 9-foot-long diamond chainsaw, basically, made for quarrying rock, and then built a 3-axis robot that can carve with it. And this is it cutting through 5 feet of solid concrete. The idea is that to carve the stairs, we'll be lowering this down into that raised bore that you saw, and you'll do a cut every 3 inches and break out the material in between, making these nice, beautiful shapes in solid rock. If you then kind of shake and bake that and repeat it for a year or 2, you end up with the 300 feet of vertical spiral stairs that we need to create. And so that saw is about to go on site later this month, actually. So we'll see how that does. I just also wanted to mention that we do have this site in eastern Nevada. This was the original site we purchased for the clock before Jeff approached us with his site and funding. We do still want to do something there. We want to make some relevant thing there, and it's an amazing mountain, Mount Washington, nestled in the Great Basin National Park. It's an in-holding. One of the ideas that we've been talking about doing is building just an observatory there that's a series of telescopes. You point at the planets, and when you point them at the planets, it basically tells you what time it is, so kind of a reverse astronomic clock. And it's covered in these bristlecone pines, which are one of the greatest clocks we have here in Nevada. And I think it's one of the only privately held stands of bristlecones in the world. So if we do nothing, we're hoping to protect those. And just a reminder of how relevant the 10,000-year time frame can be even to your daily life. A reminder happened, excuse me, just this March in Japan. That earthquake was considered a once in 10,000-year event. The tsunami itself was only a once in a few century event. But one of the more interesting stories that came out of that was these markers that were found in places in Japan. And this one read, "High dwellings are the peace and harmony of our descendants. Remember the calamity of the great tsunamis. Do not build homes below this point." And there was a lot of homes built below that point. So it's always a good reminder to me of what are the things that we are seeing as warnings about our own climate, our own larger time spans that we're either ignoring or paying attention to. Thank you.